Hey everybody, it is Easter Sunday, and I thought for today actually, I was out walking with my kids and my dog the other day, and I thought about just how much utility there is in just botanizing kind of where you are, like in the city. So I thought for the last field trip that we would do that today, because we kind of emphasize like doing field trips, but we're surrounded by plants, and the thing is when you're botanizing, just basically in town, uh, it's a little different. Like you'll see just kind of different things, and you don't have sort of this restricted list of possibilities, of what could be around you. So in a way, it's almost like harder because you're surrounded by cultivated things and naturalized things. So it's not going to be just the stuff that you would find in a field guide. So there's actually a challenge to it, and it's also a wider range because you'll see families that aren't really necessarily well represented in our area. And also, just when I think back to when I was first starting to learn plants, that was a lot of what I did, was just watching, looking at plants in people's gardens and so on. And that was kind of how I built up my botany chops initially, way back in the day. So to start out, I'm actually out here on the deck of my house, and this is my yard. And I'm going to start with this tree, which is Siberian elm. So this is an elm. Ulmus pumila is the Latin name. And this is a pretty common tree that has been planted in our area, going back to, when settlers first were coming out here. They would plant this tree because it's very fast growing. So it's a good kind of shade tree kind of over the short term. It's very weedy in our area, so what you're looking at here on the branches, these are the fruits actually. So elms have these winged samara fruits, right? A samara, again, is an achene, indehiscent fruit that has wings on it. And interestingly, I think these ones are actually doing some photosynthesis. I'm not totally sure about that, but just how green they are. I think they're photosynthetic at this stage. And so these little samaras will fall off in another couple of weeks, and they will start making seedlings all over my yard. So it's kind of a pain, but so you'll notice I've got a bunch of them in my yard here. These were sort of let to grow by the people who had the house before us, and we've cut down, quite a bunch. We've cut down a few of them, and left a few because they are a nice kind of screen and shade. So the leaves, so elms in general, they have these samara fruits. Let me see if I can reach one here without falling off the end of my deck. And let me just grab a couple here. So see these fruits you can see the seed in there and the wing coming out around it. So that's sort of the elm type of a fruit. The leaves, when they come out, they're more or less oval-shaped leaves with toothy margins. They look kind of like a birch leaf, if you know birch, things like that. One of the things about elms, here's another this is probably the parent in the neighborhood of all the Siberian elms in our neighborhood. The leaves are actually a little bit asymmetrical at the base. That's another good characteristic to recognize them by. There's a couple of really old American elms out in front of the GC building, so next door to SCA, right, the General Classroom building. And there's not that many American elms around because they were killed off by a fungal disease a few decades ago, most of them. So the fact that we have a couple in town is actually really cool. They're those big giant trees out in front of GC on the 300 side. Here in our garden, we have got a mix of some natives and some non-natives. So I'm going to talk about a couple of the ones we've got here. This grass is one that we did not plant. It's just here, and we've sort of let it go and do its thing, and it likes this spot, so it self-seeds pretty readily and grows from these bunches here. These little tufts. So this is Indian rice grass, which is Achnothyrum hymeneoides. And I think I've mentioned to you guys that I'm not a grass person really, so I don't know my grasses super well, but this is one that is quite recognizable. So it's one of our natives that just with these, the inflorescences. Did you find another one? Nice. Oh, go get that last one. Just with these inflorescences, right? The way they're really kind of openly branching like this, they're pretty distinctive. That's Indian rice grass. Right. And here's another one that's kind of fun. So this is another shrub in the rose family, Apache plume. And Apache plume, so this one, it's not flowering yet, but it'll have your sort of typical rose family flowers, 5 sepals, 5 petals. So you're seeing the dried sepals from last year, and some kind of old stamens in there. Let's see. And this is in the Rosoideae group. So you've got multiple free carpels in there, right? So closely related to roses. The leaves, you've got these leaves with kind of three main lobes on them, little tiny leaves fleshing from short shoots. That should sound pretty familiar by now, right? That's a very common strategy for desert shrubs. Some of these leaves have more than 3, but typically it's 3 lobes. Are you right, buddy? Okay. You found some more eggs.
And also this one.
Nice. What else I want to say about this? So the fruit, so these multiple free carpels, here's one from last year that didn't totally survive. The seeds in there didn't survive long enough to mature, but you can see how it's kind of like the things in the Dryadoideae, right? The mountain mahoganies and Persia, bitterbrush, and cliff rose, how the styles of the ovaries or of the separate carpels elongate and help that achene to disperse. And this is Rosoideae, so there's many free carpels there. Okay, so this is a really recognizable plant later in summer when it's making fruit. You'll see them covered with these, right, very plumose styles all over. That's where the name Apache plume comes from. So it's Fallujah paradoxa. Okay, here's at the neighbor's house down the street. Here's one that you'll see frequently planted on streets in town. So this is some kind of a prunus. It's a flowering plum or cherry, but in the genus Prunus, right? So leaves on this cultivar really purplish, so they've been selected for that purple color, but there's chlorophyll underneath all that. And the flowers, so rosaceae flowers, we've got 5 free petals. We've got lots and lots of stamens. And I'm going to just take one here. Oh, where'd it go? We've got a hypanthium there, and how well it's going to show up, but lots of stamens. Should be just one carpel in there. I'm actually going to peel this thing apart. Alright, so I've pulled back basically one side of the flower. You can see that the style and stigma there in the middle, that purple structure, and the one ovary. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit more to it. So you see that ovary in there. So that's the prunus and their cousins, right? They're characterized by just that single ovary that's going to mature into a drupe. So, good times. So we're in this area of pinyon juniper forest on this hill kind of behind my house. So there's some Utah juniper. And underneath these junipers we've got a lot of weedy stuff. We have got Burr buttercup, which we talked about at Yant Flat, right? This little ranunculacea thing, this little weed that you can just find everywhere. So it forms extensive carpets, especially under the pine and juniper trees here. We've also got some things, you know, from last year, but you don't necessarily even have to have this year's material to botanize, right? So these dead stalks from last year, these are things in, well, let me kind of go through it and we'll see if we can figure it out, right? So here are the fruits from last year. So you notice the fruit is it's a raceme, right? It's basically this one main central branch with the fruits coming off of the side, so that'd be a raceme inflorescence or infructescence. And then look at basically what's left of these fruits. Zoom in here. So do you see how they're, get them into focus. You can see how it was a capsule, and the capsule is split open, so the two pericarp walls have fallen away. And what's left is just this little thin membrane in the middle of the capsule. So these are silicles, or siliques, I guess we'd call them, because they're pretty narrow. So this is the mustard family. And this particular plant that, you know, branches a decent amount and has this shape of a capsule, I happen to know it, right? You wouldn't necessarily be able to figure out with just the evidence that we have here, but I know this one. This is Western tumble mustard, which is Cicimbrium altissimum. And then right next to it, there's actually another mustard. Looks similar, but then look at the fruits here. They're actually pretty different. So these are much longer, the fruits, what's left behind. Oh wait, I'm sorry. Cicimbrium altissimum is, I'm sorry. No, this is Cicimbrium altissimum. I said it wrong. I saw they were both here. So this is tall tumble mustard, Cicimbrium altissimum. This one is kind of more weedy. And then this one is Descurania pinnata, which is Western tansy mustard. So I kind of mixed those up. But the point is, right, that you can, you know, just using what you know about plants, even with last year's material, so even in winter time, you know, you can, even if you can't get things to species, you can make some identifications, at least to family level, just based on what you know and what you can recognize. So that's kind of the fun of it, right, is starting to apply different characteristics that you know about to try to narrow things down. Here's an astragalus, just a little tiny guy. There's my hand for scale. We can recognize, though, that pea flower, that faboideae subgroup of the pea family, right? With that, it's kind of turned to the side, but you can tell the orientation, right? This is that big banner petal in the back, and you've got the two wing petals to either side, and the keel petals down underneath there. We've got 5 fused stamens, making a little stamen tube. So an astragalus, I'm not sure of the species. If I had to guess, I would say Astragalus amphioxus. But like I said, lots and lots of astragalus species, and oftentimes hard to identify unless you really know them, and without fruits around. You often need fruit characteristics, but astragalus. Okay, here's another tiny little annual plant. So again, the idea here, right, is not necessarily knowing exactly what species something is, but just using the characteristics we know about. And then also, the more you do this, the more you can develop a feel for just, you know, like, just for some reason, you know, some plant will suggest a certain group to you. So this is an Eriogonum, and the leaves just look very Eriogonum-like somehow. Not in a way I could necessarily put my finger on. But you can see that, you know, that really almost round shape to the leaves, and the way there's a sharp distinction between the blade and the petiole, and how the leaves are kind of fuzzy. So that's all kind of, you know, it's almost like a desert trumpet. If you remember the desert trumpet, the way the leaves look, but just smaller. So this is a little annual Eriogonum skeleton weed, or Eriogonum cernuum, which you'll find pretty commonly in our area. So once it flowers, it'll have this big, you know, relative to the size of this little rosette, which, you know, there's my hand for scale. The inflorescence is like this big branching kind of quasi-umbellate thing like we often see in Eriogonum. So we found this on top of this rock. There's a little spot here where some animal, maybe a ground squirrel or something, was eating seeds up here. And so we've got all these shells, some kind of a drupe. I'm not sure what these seeds are, but it's pretty cool. You can just find mostly just these shells, and there's a few intact seeds that didn't get, or intact drupes, these pits that didn't get eaten. Here is some phlox. Can you move your shadow, bud, so we can see a little better? Thank you. So this cushion form, this is a phlox. Here is one little flower that has just opened up. So there's tons of buds here. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see the phyllotaxy, but these are opposite phyllotaxy on a phlox. And remember, we talked about how these commonly have this mat forming or cushion forming growth form. So here's one flower, and actually this flower, it looks notched, but it's actually been chewed on by somebody. Some little critter has chewed off the ends of those petals. But we've got our 5 petals that are fused into a tube. I don't know how well we're going to be able to see this without just pulling it off. So there's that floral tube. And again, if we open this flower up, like if we split that flower tube open, what we would find is 5 stamens that are kind of staggered, and you can sort of see it there. The 3 anthers right there at the tip. So there's going to be 5 anthers that are staggered down the length of that corolla tube. So that's a phlox. I'm not sure of this species, actually. It might be Ostromontana, but there's a bunch of it here on this hill. Here's an interesting one that you'll see sometimes. So this is a mustard. This is a little rock cress, it looks like, in the genus Beckera. And move for a sec, bud. No. You're putting me in shadow. So see that fly landing there? So this looks like it's making flowers. These are actually just regular old foliage leaves. And I think what's happening, I think that fly is coming to it thinking that it's visiting flowers, or maybe not. Maybe it's got its own agenda. But regardless, it's infected with some kind of a fungus that turns the leaves yellow. And if you look at them, we just looked under the hand lens, and you can see these little tiny, they look like glands all over that are probably making the fungal spores, would be my guess. So you see this fairly commonly around here, and they always seem to attack things in the mustard family, and especially rock cresses, Beckera, they seem to like. So I think that's what's going on, is that it's almost like how a gall causes a plant to grow in a weird, funky way to make a little house for an insect larva. This is similarly causing the plant to do funky things and causing this different coloration on the leaves. The trick's pollinators to come into the plant, and they pick up the fungal spores and then, you know, visit another plant and move the spores around that way. Here's something we can talk about. So here I'm seeing a little herbaceous plant with last year's fruits. So again, we're doing kind of some winter botany here. So this is apparently a perennial, because you can see like it grew, this is last year's growth. Here's this year's flush of new leaves. So these linear, we call these linear leaves, or maybe narrowly lanceolate leaves, flushing from the base. And if we look closely, we can see the leaf phyllotaxy is opposite. So zoom in there, you can see. So opposite leaves, that helps us to narrow things down quite a bit because it's less common. And then also, we have these capsule fruits with sort of these 4 different valves. You know, the outer part of a capsule we call a valve. And really that's reflecting a fruit with 2 carpels. So this is an asterid, and this is a penstemon. So these herbaceous things with 2 carpels and these dry capsular fruits, and you'll start to recognize this type of inflorescence. Like, remember we looked at Palmer's penstemon at the Hellhole Trail? This is just like a small version of that, right? So this is, I know this one, it's Owens Valley penstemon, which is Penstemon confusus. There's a bunch of it growing on this hill here. So we're back out to the street here, and here's a nice contrast. This is another phlox. This is a cultivated phlox. So these leaves are something else. That's probably a daffodil or something like that. But the flowers are the phlox, and I'll show underneath here so you can see those similar leaves, like really narrow, almost spiny tipped leaves with opposite phyllotaxy. So that's Polemoniaceae phlox family. And here's, you know, you can see basically compared to that native phlox, the flowers are basically similar, you know, with these, there's a long corolla tube, and see that corolla tube there, and then the 5 petals that flare out. So same basic body plan. So just getting to that idea of, like, once you kind of know what a phlox looks like, you can pretty much recognize them, whether the native ones or the cultivated ones. Here's something else that you'll see pretty commonly, both in people's gardens and just coming up as a volunteer or growing sort of weedy. So this is a grape hyacinth. Hyacinthus, I can't remember the species name, but you'll see these all over the place. So it's a little monocot, right? These little monocot leaves. You can't really see the venation because they're thick enough, but it's got parallel veined leaves like most monocots. And the flowers, they make these little ursulate corollas, and they should be in multiples of 3. It looks like it's in 4s here in this one. So that's uncommon for monocots, but, you know, cultivated things, lots of different things can happen. But that's one you might see around. Here's a tulip in the Liliaceae. So monocot leaves with parallel venation, right? They grow from bulbs, so most of the stem tissue is underground. They just send out these leaves and then the flowering stalks. The flower here, we've got 2 tepal whorls, 1, 2, 3 outer whorl, and 1, 2, 3 inner whorl, right? So 3 meris monocot flowers. There's your stigma with 3 lobes and 6 stamens down inside. So that's a tulip, tulipa in the Liliaceae. So here in a neighbor's yard, this is a cultivated berberis, right? So Oregon grape or Mahonia. This is probably, it looks like aquifolium, which is a pretty commonly cultivated one around here. Here's the flower. So here we've got these compound leaves, pinnately compound with spiny margins, right? And then the flowers over here, these yellow flowers. So remember the Berberidaceae, the flowers have, they have got a couple of whorls, so they've got sepals. Wait, where'd it go? There we are. You've got these petaloid sepals. So you see those outer things? Those are the 6 petaloid sepals in 2 whorls. And then you've got an inner whorl of, it looks like 6 true petals. So those are the things that are cupping around the, lost it again. Those are the true petals are the things that are cupping around the stamens and carpel in the middle there. And let's see if we got those sepaloid bracts going on this one too. That we should find, maybe. Not really seeing this. Oh yeah, there's one right there. Kind of to the upper left. That's a little bract, I think. So inside there's stamens in multiples of 3 and a single carpel with a capitate stigma. So growing by this wall, we've got this line of shrubs here. And we can determine the family by looking just generally at the characteristics. So we've got opposite leaf phyllotaxy, right? So this is a cultivated thing. Opposite phyllotaxy, and the stems are square, and the leaves have a nice essential oil smell to them. If we crush them, nice minty smell. So this is in the mint family, and here's the last year's inflorescence, right? So see how the flowers are basically kind of in these whorls at separate levels, which is a very mint family characteristic. So this is lavender. So that's a useful one to know, right? I believe the genus is Lavandula. But yeah, lavender. Lamiaceae. Here's something else in the mint family. So pretty small. There's my hand for scale. This is a little weedy mint. Henbit is what it's called. So I wanted to show the flowers because they're kind of a perfect illustration of mint style flowers, what we were talking about before. So you've actually got a corolla of 5 fused petals, but it's kind of hard to recognize exactly what's going on there. But they are very bilaterally symmetric, as you can see. And they're pretty narrow, which is very minty looking compared to something like a figwort type flower. And they often have spots on them, and they're often kind of white to pink to purple to blue. So did I say the name? Henbit, Lamium amplexicale. The stem is square, so see how I'm like turning it like that. And you've got opposite phyllotaxy, and the flowers are in these little clusters, although there's not a bunch of them out right now, but they tend to cluster. You can see all those flower buds there. So that's a fun one. And then growing right next to it in these rocks, this is a Veronica. Let me find a flower. I know I saw some flowers here. So these little purpley blue flowers. So this is in the Plantagenaceae, so the same group as penstemons, things like that, are Scrophulariaceae group. Here, this one, Veronica has 4 flowers, and it's pretty bleached out right now. I don't know how well you can see that, but they're 4 petals that are connate, but they're pretty open, so they don't really make like a tube. So they're fused together, connate, but a little bit more of an open type of a flower. But Veronica speedwell, it's just another weedy plant. I don't know the species, but here's a weed from a family that we know and love. So this is blue mustard, Chorospora tenella. You probably have noticed this one just growing around town, cracks in the sidewalk. It's a very widespread weed. Got the classic Brassicaceae characteristics. So we've got 4 petals making a cross or X shape. We've got, if we get in close, maybe we can see it here. They're there even if we can't see them. We've got the 6 stamens, 4 long, 2 short. Let's see if we can kind of pull that back a little bit more. Yeah, it's kind of hard to see, but the 6 stamens, we've got these, here's the fruit starting to develop, so we've got a cilique fruit. We actually have stellate trichomes on this one. Actually, no, I don't think this one does have stellate trichomes. And we've got the simple leaves with toothy margins. That's not a rule in Brassicaceae, but it is quite common. And broadly, this raceme inflorescence with the immature buds, flower buds at the top, mature flowers, and then developing fruits basally. So very Brassicaceae looking overall. Blue mustard, Chorospora tenella.